So the Alfred Pinto presentation really set it up for us. We're going to talk to you about equality, but the context here is a little different. We have established there's inequality. What we're trying to look at here is in terms of why haven't we been able to get to an equal society. So through the ages, through centuries, we've always had multiple attempts at creating equality, whether it's been the political sphere, economic sphere, social sphere. There have been multiple movements, there have been multiple actions taken to create this sense of equality or to push the society towards equality. But the question we pose to you today is, what's happened? What is the result of all this? So the world as we know it today is a fairly unequal place, whether you judge it by Human Development Index, liberty, GDP, or pretty much any index you want to take. So what you're seeing here is a contradiction being built up. There are these efforts by multiple agencies to create equality, but we're moving towards a more and more unequal society. So is there a contradiction? If there is a contradiction, how do we really resolve this? So one of the propositions that we have today for you, and which we think explains inequality to some extent, is we believe the pursuit of equality itself creates inequality. That is, it pushes inequality more when you try to get to an equal society. A very simple example of holding sand in your hand, the more you try to hold it, the more you let go. So that is the kind of example that we're talking about here. So in order to drive this hypothesis further, what we have done is taken a few social, economic, political contexts and explore how these hypotheses fit into these contexts. And we have predominantly picked up from the Latin American context, which is what our reading was about, but you will also find examples coming in from India and other parts of the world. So I'll give it to Srivardhan who will take you through these four contexts.
Thank you, Vas. So, as we have hypothesized, equality is more of a myth. As an equality, it's a construct which we try to achieve through various institute-driven policies and measures. So, we actually examine four contexts here. The first one will be globalization and free markets. So basically, free markets and international trade, they propose a free trade system where any country can buy or sell from any other place in the world. So which means that a country like Ecuador should be able to make and sell Panama hats all over the world. Venezuela should be able to sell oil. Germany should be able to sell cars and power tools. And it actually assumes that the whole world is poised to buy goods and services from all parts of the world. But so this actually facilitates a free flow of goods and services across international borders. But in reality, what has actually happened is that, take the example of China. So China is one of the winners of globalization. So China has used, so like if you take the example of Panama hats, China has found ways to cheaply imitate Panama hats, so much so that Ecuador has been put out of business. So China has got every advantage over Ecuador except authenticity. So just that China makes artificial cheap Panama hats does not stop people from buying them across borders. So what's happened is that since China has emerged as a prominent player in the international markets, what initially led people to buy Chinese goods is now stopping them from buying it. So there was a concerted move to facilitate equality in the market, allowing everyone to compete. But right now, countries are imposing restrictions on Chinese goods. Do not buy Chinese goods because China has actually taken a higher share of the equality, so to say. So the very move to actually create equal trade conditions has led certain parts of the world to dominate and actually created increased restrictions in trade, which goes against equality. Another example would be, if you take the example of Latin American countries, which are predominantly leftist, they're socialist countries. So they actually put equality of economic wealth and social status ahead of, let's say, freedom of business or enterprise. So what we've seen is these countries are predominantly planned economies where the government has got a very high very high amount of power actually deciding how the whole economy goes forward. So we know that Latin America has actually progressed in terms of social indicators such as welfare, healthcare and education. But jobs have not been, like, as in, the economic progress has not actually matched up to internal standards. So actually, we actually see a parallel between Latin American socialist economies and Kerala and India, where because of lack of jobs, people have been forced to migrate out of the country or out of the state to find jobs in other parts of the world, find jobs in free markets, earn there and send back money home. So the very idea that a particular economy which does not encourage free markets is living on free market remittance is itself some kind of contradiction. So we see in Kerala that the Kerala economy is heavily dependent on NR remittances. So in Latin America as well, there is a notion among the society that if you are able to leave the country and go outside, that's a mark of success. So unskilled labor outside the US or Europe is preferred over skilled, educated labor in Latin America. So low disparity in economic growth is what actually the motive, but we have increased disparity in wealth due to high spending power from remittances. A third context would be a more political context in India. So we have the affirmative action policy for breaking caste barriers. So India has seen that in order to actually emancipate socially disadvantaged groups like SCs and STs, we have made provisions for them in all sectors in education and employment. But the affirmative action rhetoric has been so high and so powerful that instead of de-emphasizing caste, we've actually emphasized caste more. So today we got, instead of blurring caste barriers have actually taken new shape and they are more, they are like very significant in today's society. So we have caste-based institutions, caste-based political parties, caste-based movements, which totally goes against the very idea of having a policy which initially planned to make caste equal. So, which again kind of reaffirms our hypothesis that a concerted institution-driven policy to blur caste divisions actually has created more caste divisions. And a final factor would be economic independence or equal status. So we can compare to Latin America. So Latin American countries are more socialist. They are skeptical of free market ideology. So as an extension of their socialist ideology, countries like Venezuela, Cuba did not want to affiliate themselves with the idea of economic order. As in, they do not want to tie their economies to certain powers like China or US. But what has happened is that they are capital-intensive economies. As in, the economy survives on oil exports, mining, etc. So these are capital-intensive, and while the government earns revenues, jobs are not being created. So this means that there is a dependency on the world market. So commodity export, such as oil, creates a dependency on the world market because only if people buy the oil will they be able to survive, and they fail to create jobs at home. So trying to remain independent, trying to remain self-reliant, trying to remain away, like trying to decouple themselves from the US, it actually caused them to be locked up with the world economy and has affected them adversely. Because over the last 5-6 years, because of global recession, countries like Venezuela and Ecuador have been in their economies have shrunk, and there have been some high inflation throughout. Their currency has been devalued, and this is because they have actually been dependent on the other economies, even though they don't want in the first place. So it's again a contradiction. So basically, all these four contexts try to reaffirm the hypothesis that any concerted move to achieve equality in itself would create inequality. To put it short, equality is dead loss of equality. So I'll hand over to Vas to take forward.
So the next very palpable question here is, I say a concentrated effort to create equality begets inequality. How does this happen? What is really the transmission mechanism? This is just a proposition, a possible thought process that we've had, but we thought we'll share it with you. So the idea is very simple. When somebody tries to equalize the resources, everybody in that ecosystem starts to think that that resource is going to be scarce in the future, and second, that resource is more valuable than it was. For example, if we take globalization, it was about free access to markets. Suddenly, the US started to think that free access to market is something that I need to protect. It becomes something which you want to protect. and you create an increased competition for that. And then all these players are out there trying to compete for that resource since you've increased the competition. But not everybody is going to win, right? And so with everybody not winning, you're going to create your economic disparity even higher. So what we're effectively saying is when you try to put in added emphasis on equality of a certain resource, you increase the competition for that, you get more people interested in that, some people win, and hence you have a bigger economic divide. So that was more in terms of historical context, more in terms of a socio-political economic context. But we also thought it would make sense to bring in a little bit of managerial context and see how it is applicable in the real world. So the first one we decided to look at was flat organization structure, something which has become a norm pretty much everywhere, whether it be banking, consulting, or pretty much any other industry you want to take. So what is the proposition of a flat hierarchy? The idea is I want to create an equality of status within my organization so that free flow of ideas happen and the organization can prosper. That is the basic tenet of trying to put a flat organization. But our proposition is in trying to do so, you have actually created a greater status divide. And let's see how this works. So when most organizations try to create or remove a status divide, they do away with some of these status markers, status symbols like a corner office, a reserved car parking, or assistant that you have. When you're removing away some of these symbolic markers, in order to still motivate your employees, you need to create a bigger salary divide. That's the only way somebody at a lower level is going to want to aspire to more to a higher level. So earlier what was probably 20% has now moved to 30%, 40%, 50%. And we live in a society where your value seems to be pretty much dictated by how much you earn. So your status is again coming back to how much salary you are earning. The salary divide has gone up, so your status divide has gone up. So status divide goes up, the company says, what do I do? Remove some more status markers, the cycle continues. So the companies get stuck in a vicious circle. We are trying to get away from the status divide, but you're creating more and more status divide. The second one we looked at seems to be a theme for the entire day today, which is about financial markets. But our propositions are inherently they're good. They came up with a good purpose. They tried to hold the sand, but they held it too tightly and failed. So what is the initial tenet of the financial market? Why was the financial market set up? It was in some sense of equal access of capital to everybody. Anybody could come in and tap the capital or give capital and earn returns. But in contrast, what has happened, what you see today are these bulge bracket investment banks who can pretty much change how the market works, go and dump 30% of the stock and really completely change the stock price, especially in the emerging market context. You have corporations who can go out there and get capital in the wink of an eye, and you have these retail investors, or you possibly have these SMEs who struggle to get their capital. So again, you see this sort of a divide where you started off with something good, but in fact you've tried to create more inequality. So we thought we'd dwell into this a little further, dissect this and see what are the individual elements of this financial markets, and Srihari will take you through that.
Thank you, As. Markets were initially started as just a method to exchange commodities. The markets and financial markets were majorly just meant to shadow what was the actual markets were. So when the markets actually came up, they were just means to trade financial instruments as such. And the way that the markets were portrayed by those who actually built the markets and wanted to make use of the markets were that it is going to be an equal opportunity for everyone. The market is just a process where you can come, sell and buy. But that was not where it stopped. The markets were portrayed not just as an economic thing, but as a political status. A lot of you would already know that US and Japan were at huge loggerheads. And this is a quote by one of the famous economists at Moody's. He went on to say that the primary linkages between Japan and US were because of trade and markets. The markets were not just looked at as an economic institution, but were actually looked at as an institution that would bring companies, economies, and the world together. The markets actually were extremely successful. If you look at the last decade, this is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The Dow Jones Industrial Average just grew. There was so much globalization, free market, everyone was happy. But then what went wrong? Things went so wrong in the last few years that the French president had to say that his worst adversary was actually the world of finance. It wasn't anything else. So which meant that the whole portrayal of the market absolutely changed. The 2008 recession actually wiped out economies. It wiped out nations that had grown. People had to decelerate growth several years into the past. Now what was the main reason of all of this? The markets were quoted as something which were affected by a confluence of factors. And the confluence of factors were not something that the market players could actually control. But what eventually happened was that a few banks had so much ability to influence the markets that they ended up controlling the whole market. In your need of creating an equal return and opportunity for giving everyone an equal return, all you ended up creating is giving the bankers or giving a few financial institutions a lot of power and basically screwing the rest. Take the example of the global recession once again. Everyone lost money, the banks lost money, people lost money. But who was it that was bailed out? The banks were bailed out. What about the private investors? Well, they were left in the lurch. Doesn't seem very equal, does it? No, the markets were built up, they had to give it some transparency, they had to give it some merit, otherwise no one was going to buy the idea. Now to buy all this idea, they came up with the concept of equal access to information. They said that the market is affected by information and this information is available to everyone. All of you guys, small investor, large investor, bank, not a bank, everyone has equal access to information. They promised an equality of information. Now everything was fine and good and all investors were able to predict and they all made enough money until 2000. Then what happened after that? There have been an increased number of cases of financial frauds, there have been increased cases of scandals that have hit the financial markets. Now what was the reason for all of this? It was this equal access to information. Once there was equal access to information, all of them could actually make the same amount of money, but no one was happy with the same amount of money. So what eventually happened was this forced corporates to actually hide information from the rest, which meant fudging your books, which was seen in the cases of Satyam or Enron or anywhere else. It also led to banks who were able to control certain preferential rates, which led to the latest and LIBOR fixing scandal as well. Now what all of this has happened is actually has created an informational asymmetry between the market players. In your need and drive to push for equal information, you've actually created unequal information. Now all this actually ties us back to our initial hypothesis that we're trying to push again and again. In your pursuit of trying to create equality, you're actually creating greater inequality. Now all these managerial contexts are fine, but now let's do something very close to our heart. A group already touched about class participation. And now what we want to say about class participation is the ideology with this class participation is started is that everyone comes prepared to class. All of us is allowed transfer of knowledge equally. All of us participate in class equally and then it's a healthy discussion that transfers. What happens, and as all of us have already seen, is that in the first few classes there is a dominant group which leads the class participation and there is the group which stays shut. And once this group which stays shut realizes that anyway there's going to be this dominant group present, they stop preparing. Because they stop preparing, they stop participating. And what class participation has eventually achieved is just giving this dominant group a much higher bar and giving these people a lower bar, which basically means that it's created inequality in an otherwise equal system. Now what we're saying is that all this that we're trying to do in this endeavor to try to create greater equality, make everything classless and so on, what is it that we've actually ended up doing? Is created greater inequality, which is actually seen that the advanced economies and the developed economies have just grown further and further, and the divide between economies that have developed and economies that haven't has increased. And as Vas pointed out initially, inequality has just increased year after year after year since our endeavor has started to create greater equality. Thank you.